Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for part two of the Agri-Tech Frontiers webinar series. Today we are going to be looking at the commercial imperative. Joining us, we have Craig Roberts, who is the drone lead at PwC, otherwise known as PwC, Andy Sproson of 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗏 Systems, and our own Jo Bellett, chair of the Agri-Environment, a special interest group. Today is the commercial imperative, net risk, picking winners and nurturing agri-tech. We're delighted everyone's here, and let's make a start. The series is a collaborative one between 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗏 Systems and ARPAS-UK, bringing together agriculture, innovation and drone operations to explore the next frontier of agri-tech. We started last month with a fascinating webinar on BVLOS and how that incorporates into obviously sort of the agri-tech side of things with drone operations. Today is the commercial imperative.
Yeah. Hello everyone, Andy from 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗏 Systems, and maybe some of you sort of know us or you don't, but we're trying to deliver sort of UK-wide large agricultural spraying and spreading and restoration with heavy lift XAG multi-rotor drones. So yeah, over the past few years, we've gone from a single sort of drone operating in the field to now a national network delivering all sorts of operations and applications across the UK. But today we wanted to sort of have a good, honest chat about net risk, not just the risks that we sort of accept, but the commercial upside that makes those risks worthwhile. So just like how we got started, a lot of people were saying to us, you know, agri-drones in the UK, it'll take years. There's too many barriers. The regulation's too much. It's too niche. But we sort of decided to believe differently, and you know, we were relatively resilient. You know, and the general consensus, like I said, agri-drones were a long way off. Regulation, caution, skepticism always dominated the conversations we had, from growers to large distributors to manufacturers of like large-scale machinery, tractors and things like that. But we like I said, we carried on, and then Craig was involved in publishing the Skies Without Limits version 2, which for us, it completely changed the narrative. It gave us like an independent validation. It shifted societal acceptance massively, including among those who were previously skeptical. They became some of our strongest champions, and it confirmed that large scale commercial adoption was possible and economically vital. So yeah, that change in mindset gave companies like ours the momentum to sort of take on the challenge and scale. So we saw a gap, a way to bring to shift the way agriculture is sort of day to day, how those applications take place. How can we lower environmental impact? How can we do it faster? Are we cheaper? Is it safer? We all saw Stuart Pearce's son, maybe, who's died from a tractor incident recently. Those are the sort of areas and things that we want to change. But equally, we personally took a risk. We started importing these XAG drones ourselves. We had to build what we call a regulatory framework from scratch. So, an operational safety case, build a pilot network and push for pesticide approvals the UK and Europe I haven't seen before, potentially even globally. Yeah, so there are some pesticide applications globally, but not done and not underpinned by data. It's been the state that has chosen to approve those or recognise drone as an aerial application, like a plane. So just to move on to very quickly, our core belief is that innovation survives when it's commercially grounded. We didn't build, are we a drone company? I'm not too sure. We don't build drones, but we didn't build it hoping a market would appear. We had the benefit of seeing what was happening elsewhere. And also when you dive down into agriculture, it's one of the most ultimate recurring revenue schemes you can think of. You know, a crop grows every year, it's harvested every year, they need to be maintained every year, and you know it is the cornerstone of modern society. Well, all society. You know, we all need to eat, but we all need to do it sensibly. And how can we do that better and safer, like I sort of mentioned before? But just to touch a little bit on net risk and what that sort of means to us is, you know, risk taken minus the opportunities created for us is what equals net risk. I was at Aerial Cities conference earlier this week. Net risk was one of the key sort of talking points across the people in JARAS, EASA, UK CAA, the Irish Aviation Authority, Spanish, German, and it was this idea that there's a wealth of data out there. How can we use that data to support the concept of net risk? And the people who wrote the regulations that we adopt in the UK for drones is pretty clear that they've basically said, we've looked at the data, we've asked for data, we've got a set of data, and that data sort of says to us human factors account for, say, 60% of drone incidents or crashes across Europe. Therefore, we can underpin the risk of the ground risk or the air risk as X, and then that was the model that they've built the framework on. But yeah, just those conversations were extremely sort of enlightening the past few days. Yeah, and I suppose just the last sort of final message from me would be, as we sort of look into net risk a bit more detail, would be Agri-Tech doesn't move forward by avoiding risk. You know, it moves forward by having a firm understanding of it, managing it, and then commercializing it. We take risks every day. You might cross a road, you've taken a calculated risk and you've mitigated it by hopefully looking left, looking right, stopping and listening, you know, if you remember that from school. So yeah, I think we try to sort of show people that we are like a living proof that when risk is paired with commercial discipline and regulatory rigor, embracing those regulations, it's not a barrier, but it can be a multiplier. So that is the commercial imperative, that is net risk to us, and that's how we pick. You know, that's how we sort of that's what we have in our minds day to day. Yeah, that's sort of it for me, really.
That's great. I think hand over to you, Craig.
Okay, well, thank you, Andy. I did not expect to hear about the green cross code today, so yeah. Thank you. That's a nice reminder. So we're going to talk about net risk, and the starting point is commercial drones remove much more risk than they introduce. That's a very important point, and it's the cornerstone of this net risk paper I'm going to talk about here. And the paper shows how a net risk approach to commercial drone operation could accelerate growth, unlock life-saving use cases, and reduce overall societal risk. So taken items that drones can definitely facilitate, but a change in regulatory mindset is required. So in terms of this presentation, I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, a bit of background, a bit about 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏 version 3, which was our look last year at whether the UK drone industry had progressed in the last 3 years or not. Open question. Then we'll talk about net risk, what that actually means in the context of this paper. Then we'll talk about picking winners. So we do think that the regulator has the, I guess, the resource to make a real change in terms of how BVLOS is approved. But to do that, to really focus, then picking winners is going to be required. We'll talk about that. And then if I have time, a bit about next steps and conclusion. So a bit of background. If you don't know me, I'm the head of aerial intelligence and innovation at PwC UK. And thanks to Andy for the kind words. I've just got to say that they're not my papers, Andy. I've got a team. But PwC's papers, I'm glad they've been useful. And Andy's company is one of 10 or 20 that we've featured over the last, 7 years of writing these reports. My background, formerly a tech startup chief exec twice. One was robots in Texas, which I sold back in 2010. And I was also chief exec at 𝗔𝗴𝗿𝗶𝗶𝗍, and I left there a long time ago, 2016, but I guess you can say I've been there in terms of all things drones, and I've been a drone consultant since 2016. In terms of PwC, so we've been going for a long time as a drones team, established 2018, and key point here, I might just slow down here. If you don't know who PwC is in terms of drones, well, obviously we're one of the big four in terms of accountancy and consultancy, but we actually have drones in our business as usual, and we've done that since 2018. They're used for things like stockpile inventory auditing. So we don't just talk about drones, we use them as well. On the talking about drones side, we've published a lot of thought leadership, and what we're trying to do with this thought leadership is challenge the established thinking, often of the government, sometimes of the industry. And we're going to talk about our latest attempt to do that, which is net risk. Now, to get to net risk, we have to talk a bit more about 𝗔𝗂𝗄𝗏𝗧𝗲 version 3. Again, this is when we looked at the UK's drone industry progress for the 3 years to 2024. And we did that by asking a bunch of companies, actually including Autospray, what do you think has happened in terms of perception, regulation, technology, and skills, and also implementation? How do you think those particular key elements of drones being pervasive in the UK have changed over the 3 years? And there were some surprising things in there, but let me take you through the highlights. So a recurring theme was that the UK regulator was risk, and this was risk averse compared to other peer countries. And this aversion to risk meant that the realization of drone benefits, including BVLOS, was being delayed. And now we also mentioned chemical spraying there as well. We'll come back to that. The UK regulator also appeared to be less commercially focused than other countries. Many examples of that. I think you'll know that there's some executive orders signed by Trump on BVLOS in the US. That's a really interesting example of real kind of commercial driving by the government in the US. And there was a real sting in the tail here, a real sort of negative impact of this, unfortunately. It meant that companies that had say a presence in the UK and also a presence elsewhere were choosing to divert their investment abroad because it was so hard to fly in the UK. And in 𝗔𝗂𝗄𝗏𝗧𝗲 version 3, some of the respondents to our survey thought that it was actually harder to fly in 24 than it was in 2021. So interesting stuff in that paper. And so what these companies wanted was change in the attitude towards risk, a more commercial focus, and of course the simplification of flight permission. And there was recognition that there had been progress. So, for example, SORA, the pilot competence that is coming through, that was seen as being, again, in 2024, seen as being positive. But again, for us in PwC, we very much thought that, the regulator's got a lot to do. Let's try and focus on the most compelling use cases where you have this combination of really strong end client pool, real demand for the use case, tangible benefits, and an acceptable risk profile. So we thought that was important. We'll come back to that again. In terms of actually UTM, we have strong opinions in UTM. That's not for this call. We'll skip over that. Do hit me up if you want to know what we think about UTM. So punchline of 𝗔𝗂𝗄𝗏𝗧𝗲 version 3. This is a quote from 𝗔𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. There's a clear difference in who is accountable for risk between the UK and the US. In the UK, it feels like the CAA owns the risk, whereas in the US, the operator and the insurance company holds the risk. So that sort of top level view changes quite a lot of what happens on the ground between these two countries. So net risk. What is net risk? Well, it's our new paper, and it's a fundamental thing. Andy touched on this a number of times here. It's just the notion that if commercial drones replaces a dangerous task, such as working at height, then the overall harm to society is lower. So net risk to society is lower. And we have this stat. I mean, we've used this a lot. This is the HSE stats. Falls from height are the #1 cause of fatalities in the UK. 50 deaths in 2023 to 2024, if I can get my teeth in there. And this is a very concerning stat. Now, we don't know how many of those 50 deaths could have been prevented by drones, but even if one could have been prevented, then that would be a win. So very important to bear that in mind. Drones make things less dangerous. Now, we wanted to establish what commercial drone risk actually was, because there's a lot of noise around drone risk. So we had two ways of doing this. One was a little bit innovative, if we say so ourselves. We decided to ask specialist drone insurers. Now, why do we ask those companies? Well, because they've got a perspective, across many countries in the world. They're underwriting, they're setting premiums, and so they really have skin in the game. This is their day-to-day business, understanding drone risk. And so we thought, well, they're going to have a perspective that will control for the differences between countries. And also we did the standard thing. We analyzed all the reported incidents from 2022 to 24 in the US, EASA member states, Canada, and Singapore. Now, these countries are something we call comparable countries in the report, and we picked them to cover a wide range of regulatory regimes, but also airspace complexity and volume of flight permissions. So it's quite a reasonable cross-section, we think. So on this first point, now, I guess if I go back to when I started in drones, which was many years ago, 2012, at that point, the insurers really thought that something catastrophic would happen with drones. But spin forward to now, and there's a much lower loss ratio. So the insurers don't think drones are going to result in some sort of catastrophic loss anymore. But that's not about regulation. It's about three things. It's about the improvement in the drone technology, improved pilot training, but also the consolidation of the industry as well. And by that, I mean, and no offense to anybody who is a one-person company, that's a great place to start. But if you go back to sort of 2012, there were lots and lots of one-person companies. But now you have the consolidation of the industry. You have larger drone service providers. And also you have things like, for example, a tier one construction company setting up their own drone team. And so subject to all the quality management processes within that company. And so overall safer. And so the punchline probably is on the right here. So from the insurer's perspective, drone risk is low. That's the quote on the left. So it's intrinsically low. But also, if you look across the countries that these insurers work for, or work across rather, they actually don't think that regulatory environment is driving drone risk. So that's a really important point to note. Now, the stats, the numbers. So we trawled all of the reported incidents or occurrences, depending on country, in the countries you can see down the left-hand side of the table at the bottom there. And the key stat here is 0 fatalities recorded in commercial drone operations for those 3 years. So that's very important, and really very few incidents. And now, in terms of this table, just very quickly, left-hand column is incidents, so reported only, and the slash gets you to reported and then investigated. Okay, so that's one category of, so say, seriousness. Even more serious to the right there, accidents. So this was an incident that was deemed major enough to be reported, and it will have resulted in an injury, for example. And let's pick up, sorry, as you mentioned on the right, so 0 fatalities, as we said a few minutes ago there. But if we take the USA, which is the second row down there, you can see the quote on the right. We estimated there's 22 million commercial drone flights in 1 year in 2024. That's the number of commercial pilots that are registered times 50 flights per pilot per year. So that gives you 22 million. And of those 22 million, well, there were 3 incidents. And that wasn't just 1 year, that was across 3 years. So it's even more than 22 million flights is your sample size. And there was only 3 serious accidents and no fatalities. So we thought, how can we make that a bit more digestible? And we said, well, do you know what? Here's a stat. You're actually more likely to be killed by lightning than a commercial drone. And you can see here, this was news to me, but the team found this. Lightning kills 20 to 30 people in the US each year. That's 1 in 10 million per person a year. But as we know, there were 22 million flights in the US last year, roughly, probably more, and 0 fatalities. So drones are low risk, and the evidence is there to back that statement up. And we thought, okay, so how do you extend this? If the UK is more conservative and it's harder to fly, are the skies in the UK any safer than these other countries we looked at? And unfortunately, we couldn't find any evidence. We can't be definitive, but based on the evidence in the paper, we couldn't find any evidence the UK was any safer than these comparable countries. But we do have evidence, and we touched on this in the Skies Without Limits 3 reference, that the UK's approach has delayed progress. Money is being diverted to other countries, unfortunately. Now, this, I think, will be very familiar to most of you, so I will skim over this, but risk is about exposure time. If you use drones, you have fewer people, The crew size is smaller. It's faster to use drones to do the tasks that might have been done in some sort of traditional manner. And also you have fewer trips to site as well. So this can mean as much as a 96% in the middle one there, or 92% reduction in exposure to risk. So that's huge just with VLOS. Also, drones can save lives. I'm going to use the middle example here in the interest of time. This is a sort of really unfortunate situation where a hiker or climber was lost in the mountains. The Glencoe Mountain Rescue team spent 10 days using traditional methods to try and find the individual. They couldn't find him. Unfortunately, this meant that he had passed away. They called the drone team in. The drone team, using grid pattern and AI recognition, they found this unfortunate climber's body within 1 day. So it's a bit of a sliding doors moment. What if they called the drone team in on day 1 rather than day 11? So drones can improve emergency service outcomes. And BVLOS, again, this will be familiar to lots of you. It supersizes the VLOS benefits, or many of them at least. So you can see examples here, 70% cost reduction in terms of remote piloting offshore oil and gas inspection, 34% socioeconomic reduction in terms of Parlin inspection. And yeah, I won't just read off the slide here. I'll just go down to this quote at the bottom because it still blows my mind. So Phoenix Air Unmanned, who've got a BVLOS waiver in the USA from the FAA to fly BVLOS for Parlin inspection anywhere in the US. And they've done 13,000 miles of Parlin inspection so far. So that regime in the US is really facilitating this commercial and safety imperative. And yeah, I'm not sure I quite have to, I'll just do this very quickly. This is an example of net risk, maybe not quite being applied in the UK. So this is Skyports. They're making deliveries to these offshore wind turbines. The turbines are visible from the shore. But because they're just beyond the VLOS boundary, they've got to have a man in a boat. They're just into visual BVLOS, or EVLOS, as we used to call it. And so this means all the risk of having somebody on a boat and the cost as well is being incurred, and it's not actually increasing safety. It's making things less safe. The net risk is worse. And so viewed through that lens, you wouldn't actually put this man in the boat. You'd actually just rely on the processes and the telemetry that Skyports are using, because they have evidence that that is safe. You don't need the man in the boat. So this is an example of net risk in action. So change in mindset can have a big impact commercially and in terms of safety. So the summary: commercial drones remove much more risk than they introduce, and a net risk approach could accelerate growth, unlock life-saving use cases, and reduce overall societal risk. So we go to picking winners, and I'm going to talk about this now. I mentioned this before. The UK's regulatory approach is laudable. It's, if you like, altruistic. It's trying to fix fix everything for everybody at the same time, which is great. But we think to get the most impact for the UK economy, the regulator should focus its efforts. And so this means picking winners. So how do you do this? Well, you look at these 4 buckets, and this is picking BVLOS use cases that are winning and most compelling for the UK regulator to invest their time and energy in. So here we have tangible benefits, so faster, safer, cheaper, better for the environment compared to the current method of doing the task. Low aviation risk, aviation, we mean air and ground risk there. Minimal regulatory complexity to implement, and then most important for us in PwC is clear end client pool. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. There's no point putting a massive amount of effort into making the BVLOS permission more efficient and simpler and more cost effective unless there's going to be somebody at the end of that who's really going to pool that use case. It's really going to be used, and so that will move the needle for the UK economy. So we applied that logic to all the use cases that were on our radar, and we came up with these 5 winning BVLOS use cases. And again, this is a paper from PwC. It's food for thought. It's a suggestion. We're not saying these are definitively the best use cases, but based on our analysis, they're the most compelling at this point. And so we think here's where you start as the CDA. Put together BVLOS PDRAs for these 5 use cases, and that will change things for the UK economy in a positive direction. And again, I'll just read these quickly, but we'll dwell on the last one. So emergency response, Parlin inspection, maritime and coastal search and rescue, rail inspection, and crop spraying and seeding. Now, given the topic of today's conversation, I'm going to drill into that a bit here. So it's really quite nailed on for this use case. We have a clear case of tangible benefits: faster, safer, cheaper, better for the environment. Drone spraying, for example, can be up to 5 times faster than manual. Using drones reduces exposure to chemicals, lowers runoff, minimizes soil compaction. Also limits the number of trips to site as well, so the overall exposure is lower. And in our paper that I've mentioned a couple of times, Skies Without Limits version 3 and also 2, we noted a 30% reduction in sprayed chemicals using drones because the targeting was more precise. So better for the environment, cost effective, really just emphasizes those points. And Autospray were kind enough to share the results of a trial they did with Marks and Spencer's. And this was using drones and autonomous vehicles to grow parsnips at a field in Yorkshire. And you can see the stats on the slide here. The autonomous grouping delivered a 57% yield compared with 40% in a conventional field. And there were fewer crop pests and better spray coverage. So lots of positive and really tangible, demonstrable benefits. Low aviation risk. So yes, the drones are heavy, more than 100 kilograms. They're flying pretty low, maybe 50 feet above ground level, and BVLOS is quite close range BVLOS. So it's more about efficiency than it is flying hundreds of kilometers. So relatively low ground and air risk there. Minimal regulatory complexity. Now we know this because of the pioneering work of Autospray. They managed to get approval to fly BVLOS in unsegregated airspace using the AAE methodology, atypical air environment. And this, again, we'd like that to be a template for a BVLOS PDRA. So everybody can fly BVLOS in terms of agriculture if they meet the conditions of the PDRA. A couple of notes here. One is the EC, the electronic conspicuity element of this may not be scalable because of the way they've done that. And the other thing is chemicals. I mean, there are certain approved chemicals, but there's many more that certainly Autospray and other companies in agriculture would like to get approved, and the CRD, the Chemical Resources Directorate, are not the fastest at approving things. But even still, having said that, if you were to fix regulation right now in terms of flying drones, BVLOS for spraying and seeding, there's still a lot that can be done even without further chemical approvals. And in terms of end client pool, and I could have gone on a lot here, but I have 3 examples. So I mentioned that approval for BVLOS in unsegregated airspace, that was for a commercial client for rural peatland in Manchester. There's a lot of demand in terms of water utilities and also national trust as well. And there's a couple of quotes there which I won't read out, but I think the summary there is if you've tried this solution, then it really is quite compelling, and it's often doing things that just can't be done using traditional means. So, for us, sitting in our neutral vendor agnostic, seats in PwC, it's kind of a slam dunk here that this is a compelling use case for a BVLOS PDRA. One last thing just to say here. Now this is our Skies Without Limits version 2 report, which is the one that looks at the potential GDP impact of drones on the economy by 2030. And there are obviously billions of potential GDP pounds that can be gained by adopting drones in that report. But one thing that's important to note is that back in 2022 or 21 when we wrote the report, we said that the barriers of perception, implementation, technology, and regulation, of course, and skills would have to be addressed for these numbers to be realized, and they have not been. So these numbers won't be hit. So why am I showing you this? Well, I'm showing this because if you look at agriculture up here, it's one of the bigger segments. It's towards the top half of the UK impact league table, if you like. So even though these are the wrong absolute numbers, the relative size of agriculture and the potential benefit to the UK economy is still valid. So we thought worth mentioning that just to say, hey, agriculture is not small beer. It can make a massive impact on the UK economy. Okay, let me just watch my time here. Oh, pretty good, actually. I'm going to skip over that. Have a quick look at that number at the bottom there. That's the context, I think, for the next thing I'm going to say here. This is the cost of a Sale 2 level UK SORA approval, 3.5k, which is a lot. And so we're very keen that the UK regulator picks some winners, turns those winning use cases into BVLOS PDRAs, leveraging the work that's been done either in the European PDRAs or in all the OSCs and maybe even some SORAs that have been approved. Capture that knowledge, put it into a stable, repeatable, low-cost format, which would be a BVLOS PDRA, and get to that point by using this change in mindset that net risk hopefully frees up. I have had some encouraging conversations with the CAA. This has shone a light on a couple of different perspectives, which is good to hear, but actually turning that into action is the key thing. So 3 points to finish. Drones, hopefully we've proven here as far as you can, have a low intrinsic risk and reduce overall harm. 2, we need to pick winners to focus limited capacity and deliver for the UK. And something to bear in mind there, I know it sounds like we're being maybe discriminatory there, but the key thing is if you pick winners and you in this case, put BVLOS PDRAs in place, then that actually greases the skids. It makes things easier for the next batch of use cases to get through the process. It changes the mindset. So it's good for all use cases. And as we say, PDRA style, cost-effective, permissive, so more things that are allowed, and prescriptive, so it's clear which hoops you've got to jump through. Those are the things we want for the regulation. Okay, so I'll just wrap up there. These are the two main parts of the team, myself, of course, and Ben. And if you want to read the paper, that is a QR code that should take you to the website to enable you to do that. Okay, I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. That's fantastic. I will also make sure that links to the report are sent out afterwards with the Watch Again link for the whole webinar to everyone who has registered. Okay, I am going to hand over to Craig, Andy and Joe for this next part, which is a discussion. Over to you guys.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to Craig and to Andy for those very interesting presentations. And I'd like to dive in, if I may, to some questions that have come to mind through your presentations. So you said that the UK has a zero risk mindset. What do you think is the biggest issue with that?
Can I just say, I didn't actually say that. That's a quote from 𝗙𝗵𝗏𝗏. So it's us taking something from a vendor. We're vendor agnostic, but we're not allowed to express an opinion, unfortunately. So, but you can certainly see there's evidence that the UK has less of an appetite for risk than other countries. And that quote from 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏 that you mentioned there, Joe, absolutely nails it on. The reason for it, I think, is if we can borrow a line from a paper from the Regulatory Horizons Council back in 2019. Drones were born in captivity, is what those guys said. And what they meant by that is that the manned aviation mindset informed how drones were regulated for. And this necessarily meant that, okay, unfamiliar, we don't have these years of experience, we're going to be as conservative as possible. Because, I mean, the idea behind it is the right idea. They want to make sure that nobody dies from a drone flying on their head. They want to be very, very sure of that. And I think when you go back to, certainly when I started doing this, which is 2012, that made a lot of sense because there just wasn't that body of evidence. But if you spin forward to 2025, there's now so much evidence that actually, you know, that attitude to risk should be re-examined. And if I give you another example here, the US, if I go back 3 or 4 years, I would have put the UK and the US at a similar sort of speed in terms of, or a similar place in terms of being progressive on drones. But what's happened is that the US, if I use the highway analogy, you know, the US has gone to the fast lane and they've put the pedal to the metal and they're really pushing forward, you know, driven by government, driven by a focus on UTM, driven by, shall we say, a real appetite to get the benefits. I mean, we have, for example, right now we have 2 US-wide BVLOS permissions for Phoenix Air and also for 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏 that I know there's probably more. And so that's making a huge difference. So, the UK has stayed in the slow lane, unfortunately, and hasn't changed its attitude. There's a lot of progress being made, but it's maybe not quite as commercially focused as the US and some other countries. Anyway, that's probably quite enough from me. Andy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's, I think, but traditionally, we've always looked to what is the risk, and the risk is whatever, it's how you determine risk is down to you. I did a skydive, and for me that was an acceptable risk, and it was great. But for Scott, he will not do that. That is not an acceptable risk to him. But what is the, sometimes maybe, I don't know if net risk is the right term, maybe net benefit. What's the risk of doing nothing, but what's the benefit of doing something with drones? And we're trying to demonstrate that with loads of different use cases. But something that I've not really had this discussion with the CAA per se, but I have had this discussion with the health and safety executive, is that they cannot take into account the social benefit of doing, say, applying a pesticide in a different way. It's a scientific assessment, and they must stick to that scientific assessment because it's food safety, safety for the environment, safety for people. So a lot of our arguments or justifications for using drones in a apply a pesticide in a specific way, it's generally always wrapped up in well, it's going to be safer. We know if we want to spray a particular invasive weed like bracken, they're always on steep hillsides in Wales and Scotland and areas like that, where people have died, people have suffered injuries through using knapsacks or just small quad bike 4x4 vehicles because the access is so difficult. And the irony is we can't use that evidence to support our justification. It's just the facts. It's where does the risk sit to the operator and to the environment? How many times are we filling the drone? Okay, we're away from the drone where it's applying, but we flip that risk by, okay, we're away from the spraying area, but we've got to touch the drone as many times as you would do a knapsack, whereas a larger tank, you'd fill it once, but you would be in amongst the spray. And the irony, so you can take those into account, and that's just a numbers game. But the fact that you're removing that person from that risk, I think we just built, or our society or our regulation sort of framework is built to assess the risk as opposed to what is the risk, but what's the benefit as well. I think that's my take on it.
Yes, well, I think I'm with Scott there. I'm not really keen on skydiving, but we are actually at a point in the road where we are at crossroads and thinking about the kind of food that we'll need for climate change and the benefits that could offer people. So I think there is a climate for change. And I just wanted to ask you whether you think, why do you think that zero risk is the status quo in the UK? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I suppose it just follows on from what I was saying just then, really, I think that's just how we're built here at the moment. And we've got a long-standing infrastructure where we're trying to pull drone technology into it. And yeah, I was speaking to a Finnish operator yesterday, and they've done several thousand deliveries in Finland. And they spent 4 years trying to sort of convince the government that societal sort of acceptance will be good. But until they got that sort of approval to do it, was only when they were able to sort of get that and build that trust with society. 2,000 deliveries later, they finally had one chap ring up and say, I am sick to death of seeing this drone fly over my house. It comes over 4 times a day. Please, can we do something about this? I'm very unhappy. So they think that is a major negative. This is going against everything that we were all trying to do. But then that engagement led to the company looking at the routes and simply changing the route. And it was the MD himself getting coffee deliveries throughout the day, whilst he was working from home. That was it, problem solved. He didn't stop the deliveries, they just optimized the route accordingly. And that was reiterated by Bobby, a man of drone delivery, I was talking to again earlier this week, and it was the same thing. They felt that the states, not the regulators, but the states themselves were risk averse. It was a political game, and there was a fear of putting your neck on the line in politics and getting it wrong, and feeling the wrath of the public for making a decision that has had an adverse impact or seen to have an adverse impact. And I think that's what holds people back, is that fear of acceptance, maybe.
Yes, I think you're right. Do you have anything to say there, Craig, on that one?
Yeah, one thing I agree with very much is that it's cultural in the UK. We look at regulations not just in drones, but across a whole bunch of other things. And the UK is just naturally much more risk averse. And so it's kind of bucking the cultural norms which are embedded for quite some time. But again, the way you do that is data. And the way you do that is by challenging the perspective. So, we'd very much like the CA to see drone risk not in isolation, but to see it in the wider context of society, as Andy said there. So it's a question of getting solid evidence, again, the cultural thing in the UK, to change the narrative. But yeah, the reason that we're here is the right reason. It was trying to make things safe for everybody, but I think we've gone a bit too far the other way, and that's just because the attitude to risk in the UK hasn't changed as the evidence has changed. That would be our argument, at least.
That's very interesting. So I just wanted to come back to your report. So why isn't the consensus from insurers cited in the report enough to change policy, do you think?
Well, it might be. I can't be too specific, but I've had a couple of interesting conversations, and yeah, there's a chance that there'll be a different perspective adopted. I've been very coded there, sorry, but yeah, certainly this is, original thought. The insurers have an awful lot of data about each of the drone service providers, and so that's a lot of evidence, and so there's potentially some way of using that. I can't say much more than that at this point, but I'm hopeful that there are certainly conversations. Whether that turns into action, we can only hope, but the conversations are a start.
And what about Andy? Do you think you have anything to say on that one about insurance?
Yeah, so Simon from Moonrock Insurance was one of the sponsors at Aerial Cities, and this very topic came up on a discussion panel with Simon, where they did have a robust discussion with several regulators about sharing data and the complexities of that data. So as our CAA, the regulator, is, we trust them, we share our data, so they've got to be extremely careful on how they share it. And I suppose there's an internal conflict there between a just culture and sharing data and information so we can all learn from it, but also as a UK regulator protecting everybody's data and managing it accordingly. But I do believe, like Craig mentioned, there is a willingness from the underwriters and insurers within the UK to share their overall risk and data package. And there was an interesting point that Simon made. He said when they looked at their overall claim risk, I think he said 70% of all claims were linked to human error. So the human factor, mistakes by us, by people. I'm sure we all do them every day. And that aligned with the assumptions under the SOA framework about those sort of risk percentages. But yeah, there's a big data set out there, and like I say, it's just getting it into context and making it into information rather than just data.
Yeah, it does sound like there's some movement in that area, and we need to keep an eye on how that's developing. So do you think using the concept of picking winners could stifle emerging drone innovation? What do you think about that? Andy, do you want to answer that first?
I don't know, because I think the notion there is to forge paths and enable. So, okay, an agricultural PDRA for a beyond visual line of sight, you immediately think, because you've got the word agriculture in it, you immediately think it's agricultural, it's food, it's crop spraying, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is it's environmental as well, and there's so much you can do in this space. Peatland restoration, woodland seeding, moving into, there's, you can help with wildfires and all sorts of things, But I think it's just, if you create those paths, the industry will lift with everyone, and it will just give, if anything, it'll give you the experience to then work under those environments, then pivot to your own sort of more niche or more complex area. So there's a lot to be said for forging those sort of key paths, allowing people to get some experience and move out into their own sort of area.
Yeah. So what do you think about that then, Craig? Picking winners. I think that was your phrase, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the phrase we use in the report. We use that quite a lot. So our idea is maybe it's kind of the same as Andy there. So the winners are being picked because they're really compelling. Yeah. So tangible benefits, low risk, low regulatory complexity, and a real sort of, massive customer appetite. You put this, I don't know, 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗲𝗏 array in place for this use case, and somebody's really going to use it a lot. And so the innovative use cases don't fall into any of those categories. They're somewhere else. Yeah. So if you've got an innovation, there's going to be, I don't know, half a customer. It might just be a glint in the eye. So there wants to be a mechanism to approve that, and that's SORA. That's what SORA does well, right? It's a bit expensive perhaps, but that's the cost of SORA that's causing the problem. So maybe some government funding would help there. And then once that innovative use case has been pulled along the conveyor belt, and there's a really a customer with a voracious appetite to use the service, then you can say, hey, we've proven this. Look, we've got these hopefully not too many months or years of prove up in terms of the customer appetite and the regulatory approval. Using SORA, we think we can operationalize, if I can put my teeth in there, I'll leave that there. We can turn this into a 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗲𝗏 array, and that will make things even faster. We'll like blue touch paper, and we'll start to really make this use case happen. So we see that sort of conveyor belt effect. So for me, this is just good because it grows the drone share of the economy. It makes things safer. It makes things better for the environment, cheaper, whatever, faster, and it gives you this path to pull through the innovative use cases. So, that's how we viewed it.
That's really interesting. I just wanted to ask, how can you strike the balance between nurturing startup tech and developing a commercial market?
It's about evidence for me. So if I reflect on my, many years of government initiatives, for me, as we all are, a taxpayer, I would like to see people that take companies that take government money having to produce something once they've actually done their 𝗙𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏 trial, for example. So all of the IP or some evidence that can be used to maybe develop regulations more efficiently. And if that's not going to be the case, then I'd like to see some sort of commercial end result. So do you know what? We, the government, will fund this company through this innovative thing in terms of flying drones if this company can prove they have an end client who's going to have some skin in the game and is going to buy this service once it's proven. So for me, it's about those things. It's not so much the key thing is to have this way of growing the economy by proving that you're getting value for government money. So that's the way I think the government thing is key to that.
And what about you, Andy? Do you have any thoughts on that?
To be honest, completely agree with that. I mean, it's so funny you say that. That's exactly what we're doing. We've just won some money from Innovate UK, and we're doing that exact same thing. We're not doing any demonstrators. We're expanding the areas of we're applying to increase the number of our atypical locations. Okay, we're doing what we're doing. We're going to seed trees. We've done it before, as you can see in the picture on my background. We're going to learn how to restore peat, and we're mirroring the exact techniques that are done by the conservation bodies already. But then you pull in the mix of a new sort of technology like a drone. Like, how do you provide? How do you make a template, a blueprint for others to come forward and create that commercial pull? And we're making templates. How do you do this? It'll be, you do it in X, Y, and Z. You do it, there's a set way of doing it. It's approved by the Woodland Trust. It's approved by the National Trust. Those are, like I said before, great sort of independent sort of authority figures and organizations who can then we can push that out to the world then, and that will have an immediate impact on the tender processes. Because if anyone's ever had a look and looking to get some feelings for the tender processes, if you look at woodland creation, it's all about sapling planting, specific spacing of saplings, and weed control around the sapling, so spraying glyphosate. We're trying to not do any of that. We're doing a different way, so we don't fit into that tender. We don't qualify to apply for that tender, which is like commercially damaging. But these processes through this funding should change that, and that gives the commercial sort of value that you should be getting from these sort of grants. Yeah.
So coming back to spraying then, so outside of the data that's cited in the report, is there a case study or a set of data that makes crop spraying a winning use case? Do you have that, Craig?
Well, our data is in the report. Yeah, we've got a couple of examples there. The 30% that I mentioned, so that's using drones gives you more precise targeting, and so you save 30% of whatever you're spraying, pesticides, fertilizers. That's actually an international study. And then we've got the examples from, I guess, Autospray's Marks and Spencer's trial, which is pretty compelling in terms of the actual yield figures as well. So yeah, I think there's actually, Andy, this is one for you. I mean, do you have some more compelling case study evidence that you're able to share?
Have you built more evidence? Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, we've got several data sets now. I suppose it has different sort of faces really, but the main one is a risk-based data set, which would be drift. So if we spray something, where does it drift to? How far do we need to keep away from people? How does that change the procedure, and how do we maintain on target, not go off target onto other crops? So yeah, that's been several years in the making, and we've got a real strong sort of understanding now of where those droplets go. This is also a regulatory standard, so that will help the risk models and the profiles going forward to sort of underpin commercial approvals in the future. And then the other face of that is efficacy. So it's okay, you can demonstrate how far, if you spray something, how far it goes, and you've got that sort of safety buffer zone mentality. But then if you're going to spray something, how does it cover the crop? How good is that application technology? Is it comparable to current tech? Is it worse? There's all sorts of things. And then you've got another layer of complexity within agriculture and horticulture is if you apply, certain products need to be applied in a certain way. So an insecticide, for example, you need to make contact with that insect. If you don't, the insect doesn't perish and you don't protect the crop. So what is the sort of approved and currently agreed sort of good practice for that type of application? We must go out and replicate that under those regulatory standard sort of data requirements. So yeah, we're in the middle of all that, and we're in the process of commercializing those data sets to introduce commercial usage into the UK.
That's very interesting. So just coming back to the economy and financial values then, how quickly can a use case, a winning use case like Agri-Tech, add financial value to the UK economy? I think that's a key question that the government would like to know.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not one I can answer. I mean, what we can say is that agriculture is a big segment. You saw that in one of the slides. So the impact will be huge. And we can say that there's evidence that there's a whole slew of benefits, again, faster, safer, cheaper, better for the environment, proven through companies like Andy and Robert's company, where we can see that actually this will deliver something. And so we also know that if you think about the government in the UK as a whole, the sheer volume of solar applications that Autospray, for example, have, that's causing a lot of I guess work in the CAA. If there were a BVOS PDRA, that would dramatically reduce that. So you have a whole bunch of benefits, and not just the straight up faster, safer, cheaper, better for the environment. The cheaper part also means things are more efficient, and so this by its very nature will accelerate the growth of the agriculture sector. So can't give you a number, but the logic is very much in sky's the limit version 2, and the evidence is in 3 and in this net risk paper as well. So yeah, I don't think that any of the government is going to hesitate to back an agriculture improvement, because of course agriculture is all about food security, which is a major topic. Anyway, getting a bit on a tangent there. So I think the case is compelling. We could make it if you held our feet to the fire, but we can't really say anything at this point in time, unfortunately.
And did you want to add anything to that, Andy, or shall I move on?
Yeah, I can go a touch further. Yeah, we're targeting yield losses. So yield losses are published every year by the Office of National Statistics, and we can see what's gone in and what's come out. And from a high level approach, that is what we call food inflation. So how much food do we need to import from other countries to feed ourselves? And that ultimately costs more. There's your food inflation, supply and demand, simple stuff. But if we're able to get on to the land when you can't at the moment, so the top of my head say slug pellets, it's a really compelling argument. We're actually not trying to put any more product down than what's already used. We're just trying to do it in a more timely manner. So we could apply it, for example, when it's raining. That's when the slugs are the most active, when it's wet. That's when your ability to get on the land is at its worst, because it's going to be wet. It's going to be, you're going to cause major ruts, crop damage going on with your heavy machinery. And what is that? Those impacts go on and on and on. But from an economical perspective, and financial and job creation, we believe this will be a major sort of job creation industry just for slug pellets, because overnight, I think there's thousands of operators who are trained at the moment to apply slug pellets with a PA4GS. If we translate that to a drone application, and like I say, the net risk and net benefit sort of mindset is, I can't remember what you said, Craig, about the drones being born in
captivity. Yeah.
Born in captivity. Yeah.
It's
so
a
like
borrowed.
yeah. So if you flip it round and say the current practice was to use it with a drone, and then you go to the regulator today and say, I would like to apply slug pellets on a petrol quad bike, going through the mud. I'm unable to go at a consistent pace. I'm unable to spread them at a consistent distance compared to the drone. Can I do it, please? And I think most likely they'd laugh you out of the room by saying it's a ridiculous concept. How can you apply to do something less safe? And that applies to all levels of other drone uses within the report. If I want to do a line inspection with a helicopter with people inside it, to me it sounds crazy. Surely it's safer to do it with a drone.
Yeah. It does sound like you'll actually be applying less slug pellets, because they'll be more targeted and applied when they're needed most, rather than having to wait until you can get on the land when the land's not too wet to apply them. Yeah. So Elena, you've just appeared again. Did you want to say something?
I was going to say that we should probably move on to the Q&A section, because we are actually coming up to the hour's time.
Okay.
And to give everyone who...
I'd just like to thank Andy and Craig for their answers. Thank you very much for your presentations and answers. But over to you then, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you. As I say, thank you very much for coming along. Please do ask questions in the Q&A section, because this is your chance to have a word with Andy and Craig on this. I'm going to start off with Cameron's question, which starts with, I love a bit of risk chat. The HSE, legal sector and the rest of the aviation sector talk about tolerability, the threshold of fatality rate around 1 to the power 10 to the power of 4 per annum, from the perspective of the person experiencing the risk. However, the new SORA target level of safety risk is measured from the perspective of causing fatalities. How can we square this circle and demonstrate there is a net benefit?
Yeah, I think that's a great, very, very well expressed question there. I mean, for me, SORA is far too conservative on risk overall, but what we've done is try to separate them. One example, so that the flyaway stat from the Dutch trade body, where SORA's got, I guess, 100 times their observed flyaway results embedded in the SORA 2. And so, we know SORA is too conservative. And so what we're trying to do in the conversation is kind of separate these things. We're trying to say, hey, drones are very low risk. Here's the evidence behind that. And do you know what? We don't have to get into 10 to the power of statements here, because it's blindingly obvious that if I am going to go to site 5 fewer times, if I'm going to spend a fifth of the time on site, if I'm not going to be working at height, there's going to be a net benefit. Now, The question, this is a very well written question here. If we are, as PwC, or somebody is asked to come up with a framework that quantifies these two sides of the equation, the drone risk, I guess that's quantified in SORA, arguably, and then the risk to society, then that can be done as well. But it's such a, I mean, for us, a blindingly obvious argument. We're leading with that, and the detail, if the argument is bought into, can follow. And also, we do think that the on the drone risk side, as we mentioned before, the insurance data that they've got there, that can really, give some weight to that argument, give some quantification to that as well. Anyway, I will stop there. Really good question.
There is a same question, same person. There is no underpinning published methodology for how UK SORA is founded, i.e. any arguments citing JARA's SORA version 2.5 Annex F ground risk are rejected, and the air risk model is due out from JARA's shortly. How can the UK CAA be encouraged to publish their working on how risk inputs deliver a target level of safety? I appreciate that's quite a long question, but I think it's a really interesting one.
I think the short answer is we'd just love to see all the workings. So as to how you convince them to do that, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure either. From when the past few days when I've spoken to the guys at JARAS, EASA, they all sort of super supportive and basically saying that they're just trying to put a figure on it just to get things moving and want to relax the figures, but because of a lack of data, they've had to, like you say, we could go conservative, but are looking forward to relaxing those risk models to enable more.
Mm-hmm. A couple of questions I've had sent in by somebody who unfortunately couldn't make today's webinar. Can net risk be adopted within an agriculture context? I think we've probably looked at this in quite a lot of detail, and I would argue that yes, we can. Craig, what would your thoughts be?
Yeah, I think it's the poster child for this. It's such a nailed-on use case. For me, the profile of risk is dramatically reduced. And I know I won't say them again. All the benefits we talked about before are, they're demonstrable. Andy, I presume you think something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, from multi levels to that. Yes, absolutely.
Is there anything PwC has interacted with that shows the ROI for investing in deeper technology for BV loss, MSO, full autonomy, especially if farmers or other markets have a clear ceiling and the value for them? They'll only pay for what not spraying, seeding by drone will mean for them. How is deep tech funded and trials done when commercial viability is still elusive?
That's an interesting one. So for us, it starts with, the short answer is we haven't done that analysis, but it's an interesting point. What we start with is there an actual end client that needs the service? Yeah. And if there's an end client with a burning desire to use drones for something, then the next question is, okay, can we do this PLOS? Sometimes we have a question, can we use light aircraft or satellite? And then, okay, the answer is no. There's a really compelling end client requirement, and it has to be BVLOS. It's a question of how can you make that happen in the most efficient manner, and that's really hard right now in the UK. And any levels of deep tech, levels of autonomy, and perhaps even having something like a UTM, you just don't have the environment in the UK to do any of that stuff. So yeah, we wouldn't go that far because the UK just isn't a fertile ground for that sort of approach.
So I just wanted to jump in on that one actually as well. So as a researcher in a university, we would normally look at this kind of activity as something we would apply for funding for. And we have been given funding for these kind of trials. And then as a researcher, we would do the ground truthing and analysis to verify whether that data was accurate or not, and to prove independently that that was a way to use drones in a safe environment, and it did produce the results required. So I think that there is an opportunity there to get small amounts of grant funding to prove these case studies and then feed that data back to help with the regulations going forward. So that's a role that universities can play.
What agri or government stakeholders need to be better informed, and how?
I suppose you've got DEFRA, and they probably would be the main port of call there. The government government body, set policy and agenda both up and down to Westminster and then down again to the likes of the regulators. So they would be that central conduit in my eyes, where people like us and other people in the agricultural drone sort of industry encouraged to reach out and educate and show them what can be done, what the benefits are, what the hurdles are, and try and move forward together. I suppose that would be the agricultural special interest group through Joe would be the conduit. Say conduit again, but you know what I mean. The central point for the industry to speak to DEFRA. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, the problem is that DEFRA often makes policy and disseminates money to people, but it would go through someone like Natural England that we will work closely with to work on a research project. And so all the information isn't necessarily passing back to all the stakeholders when you're successful in a project with someone like Natural England, or if you're working with people on the ground, a farmer might perceive something to be very successful, but that information doesn't necessarily travel around through the NFU or other stakeholders to all other farmers in the area. And so there's a sort of a communication channel that needs to be developed top down and bottom up, really.
Mm.
Craig, did you want to add anything at all to that?
Yeah, I probably had a slightly different take, just to wrap things up. I mean, for me, what I'd like to see is that all the regulators getting together. So HSE, CRD, the CAA, and having a conversation about saying, okay, how can we have this holistic view of what we're trying to do here? You know, there's evidence that drones are better in terms of the agricultural outcomes. So what can we do to actually take the shackles off the CAA, get some BVLOS permissions approved more simply? How can we accelerate things with the CRD? Because there's definitely a cohesive argument to be made for this. This is better for Britain, and so putting those together without having a super regulator and just suggesting some sort of change in KPIs, I think that would make a big difference. Maybe not quite the question, but the question did spark something we've been talking about. And if you hear anybody mentioning super regulator, that's not the way to fix this. Having one regulator who sits over everybody else just adds more complexity. It's about getting motivation into each of the appropriate government departments that drives in the same direction.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I think that did indeed wrap it up nicely. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Thank you to our speakers, and also thank you to Joe. And just as a final point, we have on December the 11th, we have a session called Insuring the Skies with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 from Moonrock Drone Insurance. We're delighted to see you there. I will ensure that everyone receives an invitation to attend and come along and listen and find out more. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, then. I shall let you carry on then with your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.